My beloved child. There is something unusual about this morning. Not because the sun rose differently. Not because the world suddenly changed. But because somewhere, in a quiet room filled with thoughts that had been held back for far too long, a woman sat alone and made a decision she could no longer postpone. And that woman is connected to the person your heart has been waiting for. She did not announce it. She did not call a family meeting. She did not tell everyone what was moving through her mind. Yet the choice she made this morning carries a weight that reaches far beyond her own life. And strangely, it reaches toward yours. Before you dismiss these words, think about everything you have carried in silence. The nights when you wondered if anyone truly saw the depth of your heart. The moments when you questioned whether your patience was leading anywhere at all. The prayers whispered into empty rooms. The tears quickly wiped away before anyone noticed. You have endured seasons where nothing seemed to move. Seasons where answers remained hidden. Seasons where even hope felt tired. Yet while you believed nothing was happening, conversations were unfolding beyond your view. Thoughts were changing. Hearts were softening. And this morning, one of those hidden changes reached a turning point. But that was not the moment that changed everything. Because the decision itself was only the beginning. The reason behind it is what matters. You see, this woman has been watching more carefully than anyone realizes. Not watching with judgment. Watching with concern. Watching with the quiet wisdom that only comes from years of experience. She has noticed things others overlooked. The way certain stories never quite added up. The way certain emotions appeared whenever your name surfaced. The way silence sometimes revealed more than words. For a long time, she kept these observations to herself. Not because they were unimportant. Because she needed certainty. And certainty takes time. Especially when matters of the heart affect more than one life. This is where many people become discouraged. They assume that because they cannot see movement, nothing is happening. But some of the most significant changes occur behind closed doors. Inside private reflections. Inside conversations that never become public. Inside moments when someone sits alone and finally admits a truth they have avoided. And that is exactly what happened this morning. A truth was acknowledged. A realization was accepted. Yet what happened next was never meant to be revealed so quickly. Because once that realization settled into her heart, she began connecting pieces from the past. Pieces that had remained scattered for months. Perhaps even years. Suddenly, events that once seemed unrelated began forming a clearer picture. Comments she once ignored now carried meaning. Memories she once dismissed now felt significant. Questions she never answered suddenly demanded attention. And at the center of those reflections stood one person. You. Not because you forced your way into the story. Not because you demanded recognition. But because your presence has left a deeper impression than you know. If this sounds familiar, it may be because you have spent much of your life feeling unseen. Giving more than you received. Offering kindness without guarantees. Remaining faithful during seasons that tested your spirit. What you often fail to realize is that quiet strength leaves a lasting mark. People remember it. Even when they never say so. Especially when they never say so. And now, someone who once remained uncertain can no longer ignore what has become clear. Yet there is another piece to this story. A piece that nobody expected. Because while this woman was reaching her decision, another conversation was already beginning elsewhere. A conversation she knew nothing about. Different people. Different place. Different circumstances. Yet somehow connected to the very choice she had just made. The timing was almost impossible to explain. Not miraculous. Not unbelievable. Simply remarkable. The kind of timing that causes people to pause and wonder whether life has been arranging details behind the scenes all along. And this is where the mystery deepens. Because the decision made this morning was not a final answer. It was permission. Permission for something that had been delayed. Permission for a truth to move closer to the surface. Permission for someone else to finally speak honestly. But there is one detail she has not revealed. One realization she reached while sitting in that quiet room. A realization so unexpected that even she had to sit in silence for several minutes before accepting it. Because once she understood this single truth, she realized everything she believed about you might have been incomplete. And what she discovered next involved a name she never expected to hear. My beloved child. The silence that followed her realization was unlike anything she had experienced before. Not because she was afraid. Not because she regretted what she had uncovered. But because some truths arrive so gently that they completely rearrange the way we see the past. She sat there for a long moment, her hands resting quietly in her lap, replaying conversations she thought she had already understood. Yet now, every memory seemed different. Every pause carried meaning. Every unfinished sentence felt like a missing piece she had finally found. And then she remembered something. A conversation from months ago. A brief exchange that seemed insignificant at the time. The kind of moment most people would forget. But she did not forget it now. Because suddenly, she realized that someone had tried to tell her the truth long before she was ready to hear it. The words had been simple. Almost casual. Yet hidden beneath them was a feeling that had never disappeared. A feeling connected to you. That realization stirred something deep within her. Not excitement. Not surprise. Understanding. The kind that comes after years of watching life unfold. The kind that can only be gained through experience, heartbreak, forgiveness, and grace. And as that understanding settled into her heart, she began asking herself a question she had avoided for a very long time. What if the person she had been worrying about was never the problem? What if she had misunderstood the situation entirely? The thought stayed with her. It followed her from room to room. It remained present as she poured her morning coffee. It remained present as she looked out the window. And the more she reflected, the stronger that feeling became. Because she could no longer deny what she had quietly observed. Whenever your name appeared, something changed. The atmosphere shifted. Expressions softened. Defenses weakened. Even people who rarely showed emotion seemed affected in ways they could not explain. For years, she had convinced herself those moments meant very little. This morning, she finally admitted they meant far more than she realized. But that was not the moment that changed everything. Because while she was reflecting on these memories, another discovery emerged. One she had never anticipated. She found herself revisiting a conversation she once considered disappointing. A conversation that ended with uncertainty. At the time, she believed it had closed a door. Now she wondered if it had actually opened one. The perspective was completely different. And suddenly she understood why certain events never progressed the way everyone expected. Why plans fell apart. Why timing never aligned. Why opportunities seemed to disappear just as they appeared. For so long, those delays looked like failures. Yet this morning they appeared to be protection. Protection from rushed decisions. Protection from misunderstandings. Protection from choices made before hearts were truly ready. If you have ever felt forgotten, hear this carefully. Not every delay is a denial. Sometimes life allows distance so clarity can grow. Sometimes answers arrive slowly because the people involved must become different versions of themselves before the next chapter begins. And whether you realize it or not, much has changed. Not only in you. In others as well. The people connected to this story are not who they were before. The wounds they carried have softened. The fears they once protected have weakened. The assumptions they relied upon are beginning to crumble. And that is why this morning mattered so much. Because one person's decision has a way of influencing many others. Especially when that person is respected. Especially when that person has remained quiet for a long time. What she decides next could encourage others to speak honestly. Others to reconsider. Others to stop pretending they do not feel what they feel. Yet there was still one obstacle. One final uncertainty she could not resolve on her own. And strangely enough, the answer appeared sooner than expected. Not through a dramatic announcement. Not through some extraordinary event. But through an unexpected reaction from someone she never suspected. A reaction that revealed far more than words ever could. The moment was brief. Almost invisible. Most people would have overlooked it. She did not. Because in that instant, she saw something in their eyes. Something impossible to fake. Something impossible to ignore. And once she saw it, she understood why so many things had remained hidden. But what she realized about that person's true feelings would soon lead her to make a phone call she never planned to make. A phone call that would begin with a simple question. And end with a revelation no one was prepared for. My beloved child. The phone remained untouched for several minutes. She stared at it, not because she doubted what she had seen, but because she understood the weight of what might happen once the call was made. Some conversations change nothing. Others quietly redirect the course of many lives. This felt like the second kind. Outside, the morning continued as normal. Cars passed. Neighbors moved through their routines. The world carried on, unaware that a single decision was preparing to unfold behind a closed door. And perhaps that is how many turning points happen. Not with grand announcements. Not with dramatic scenes. But in ordinary moments that nobody notices until much later. Finally, she reached for the phone. Her fingers hesitated. A deep breath filled the silence. Then she dialed. The call was answered sooner than expected. At first, the conversation sounded harmless. Simple greetings. Polite questions. The familiar rhythm of people who had spoken many times before. Yet beneath every word, something else was present. Something neither person was saying directly. And both of them knew it. The discussion wandered through family matters. Old memories. Recent events. Topics that seemed unrelated. But then a name entered the conversation. Not yours. Someone else's. And suddenly the tone shifted. A pause appeared. A longer pause than expected. The kind of silence that reveals more than an entire paragraph of words. She noticed immediately. Years of experience had taught her to recognize the difference between ordinary silence and meaningful silence. This was meaningful. Very meaningful. Because in that brief pause, a carefully guarded truth almost revealed itself. She asked another question. Gentle. Respectful. Nothing confrontational. Yet the answer she received only deepened her suspicions. The person on the other end became unusually careful. Choosing words slowly. Avoiding direct statements. Trying to appear unaffected. And that is when she knew. People rarely become cautious when discussing something that means nothing to them. The heart always leaves traces. No matter how carefully it tries to hide. And this realization brought her back to you once again. Because every road seemed to lead there. Every reflection. Every unanswered question. Every emotional thread. Somehow they all pointed toward the same place. Yet what happened next was never meant to be revealed so soon. Because the conversation unexpectedly took a turn neither of them anticipated. The person on the phone mentioned something from the past. A detail she had completely forgotten. a moment she barely remembered. But once it was mentioned, everything changed. The memory returned instantly. A gathering. A conversation. A particular look exchanged across a room. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Now it appeared impossible to ignore. She could suddenly see what had been hidden in plain sight. Not hidden by deception. Hidden by timing. Because people often understand their experiences only after enough time has passed. And time had finally done its work. The pieces were fitting together. Slowly. Clearly. Unmistakably. If this sounds familiar, it may be because you have experienced something similar. Moments from your own life that only made sense years later. Prayers that seemed unanswered until you realized the answer had been forming all along. Doors that closed only to protect you from walking through too soon. Life has a way of revealing meaning when our hearts are ready to receive it. And that is exactly what was happening now. But another mystery was about to emerge. One she never saw coming. Because while speaking on the phone, she casually mentioned your name. Just once. No emphasis. No special attention. Simply spoken in passing. And the reaction she received was immediate. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Yet impossible to miss. The voice on the other end changed. The energy changed. Even the breathing changed. For a split second, genuine emotion slipped through the carefully maintained composure. And in that instant, she learned something astonishing. Someone had been carrying feelings much longer than anyone realized. Much longer. Long enough that those emotions had become woven into everyday life. Long enough that hiding them had become second nature. Long enough that even they may not have fully understood their own heart. But that was not the discovery that left her speechless. No. The discovery that truly stopped her came seconds later. Because after another pause, the person quietly revealed the reason they had remained silent all this time. A reason connected to a promise. A promise made years ago. A promise almost nobody knows exists. And when she heard who that promise was made to, she felt the entire story shift in a direction she never expected. My beloved child. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The words she had just heard seemed to hang in the air between them. A promise. Not a casual commitment. Not a passing remark made and forgotten. A promise that had quietly influenced years of decisions. Years of hesitation. Years of silence. And now, for the first time, its existence had been revealed. She leaned back in her chair, trying to absorb what she had learned. Suddenly, so many unanswered questions no longer felt mysterious. They felt connected. The missed opportunities. The careful distance. The moments when emotions appeared only to disappear again. The strange pattern of moving closer, then pulling away. None of it had been random. There had been a reason. A reason hidden beneath the surface all along. Yet what unsettled her most was not the promise itself. It was the person to whom it had been made. Because that individual had influenced this story far more than anyone realized. Not through control. Not through manipulation. But through a single conversation that occurred years ago. A conversation whose impact lingered long after everyone believed it was over. As she listened, fragments of that old discussion began emerging. Not every detail. Not every word. Just enough to understand its significance. There had been concern. Protectiveness. A desire to prevent future pain. At the time, those intentions may have seemed wise. Perhaps they even were. But life has a way of changing people. The person who made that promise years ago is not the same person today. Experience changes us. Loss changes us. Healing changes us. And sometimes, after enough growth has taken place, we discover that old agreements no longer fit the people we have become. That realization settled heavily into her heart. Because she could hear it in the voice on the other end of the line. Regret. Not regret for keeping the promise. Regret for how long it had delayed the truth. The conversation grew quieter. More honest. More vulnerable. And then something unexpected happened. The person stopped speaking about the past. They started speaking about the present. That was when everything shifted. Because the emotions being described were not old emotions. They were current. Alive. Still present. Still growing. Still impossible to ignore. She closed her eyes as she listened. Every word confirmed what she had slowly begun to suspect. This was not a story that belonged to yesterday. It belonged to now. And perhaps that is why this message is reaching you today. Because many people believe time erases genuine feelings. Sometimes it does. But sometimes time reveals whether those feelings were real to begin with. What fades easily was never deeply rooted. What remains after years of uncertainty often carries a different kind of meaning. A deeper one. A quieter one. A stronger one. If you have ever wondered whether your patience mattered. Whether your prayers disappeared into silence. Whether your kindness went unnoticed. Hear this gently. Not every answer arrives when we expect it. Some answers require many hearts to grow before they can be safely received. And that growth has been happening. Even during seasons when nothing appeared to move. Even during moments when you felt forgotten. Especially during those moments. But that was not the moment that changed everything. Because near the end of the call, she asked one final question. A question she had been carrying since the beginning. Simple. Direct. Impossible to misunderstand. When she asked it, the room seemed to fall completely silent. No quick response came. No easy explanation followed. Only a long pause. Long enough to reveal that the answer mattered deeply. And then, finally, the truth emerged. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. The person admitted something they had never said aloud before. Something they had protected for years. Something they believed would remain hidden forever. The confession was brief. Yet its impact was enormous. Because in that single admission, she finally understood why every road had continued leading back to the same place. Why every conversation somehow returned to you. Why every attempt to move forward eventually circled back. The answer had never been complicated. It had simply been concealed beneath fear, timing, and responsibility. Now those barriers were weakening. One by one. And for the first time, she began considering a possibility she once dismissed entirely. A possibility so significant that it inspired her to take another action before the day was over. An action she had never imagined herself taking. Because after ending the call, she immediately stood up, walked across the room, opened a drawer she had not touched in a very long time. And pulled out something connected directly to you. The moment she saw it again, a memory returned with startling clarity. A memory containing one detail. One detail that could completely change how this entire story is understood. And when she realized what that detail meant, she whispered 4 words to herself that no one else was meant to hear. My beloved child. The drawer slid open with a quiet sound that seemed far louder than it should have been. For years, its contents had remained untouched. Not forgotten. Simply set aside. Like certain memories we place on a shelf because we believe their chapter has ended. Yet some chapters never truly end. They wait. Patiently. Silently. Until the moment arrives when they can finally be understood. Her hand moved carefully through old papers, photographs, and keepsakes collected over many seasons of life. Each item carried a story. A reminder. A fragment of time. But she was searching for one thing in particular. Something she had not thought about in a very long while. And when she found it, her breath caught. Not because the object itself was extraordinary. To anyone else, it might have appeared ordinary. Almost insignificant. Yet she understood its meaning immediately. Because attached to it was a memory she could suddenly see with perfect clarity. A moment she had misunderstood from the very beginning. She sat down again. The object resting quietly in her hands. And as she stared at it, the past began unfolding before her like pages from a forgotten journal. She remembered the room. The atmosphere. The expressions on people's faces. The conversations happening around her. Most importantly, she remembered something she had overlooked. A glance. Just a glance. Brief. Unspoken. Gone in an instant. Years ago, it seemed meaningless. Today, it felt impossible to ignore. Because now she understood what that look had been trying to communicate. Not words. Not intentions. Something deeper. Something that had remained consistent through every season that followed. And this realization brought a sudden ache to her heart. Not a painful ache. A tender one. The ache that comes when you finally recognize how much someone has quietly carried. How much they have hidden. How much they have sacrificed without expecting recognition. If you have ever felt that way. If you have ever given your best while wondering whether anyone noticed. If you have ever remained strong while feeling emotionally exhausted. Then perhaps you understand why this moment affected her so deeply. Because she was beginning to see a story that had never been fully visible before. A story built not on grand gestures. But on consistency. Patience. Loyalty. Quiet devotion. The qualities that often go unnoticed until enough time has passed. And that is when she whispered those 4 words. Words spoken so softly that only the walls of the room heard them. I was wrong before. The admission surprised even her. Not because she resisted the truth. Because accepting it required humility. It required acknowledging that her earlier conclusions had been incomplete. And once she admitted that to herself, another realization arrived. One even more powerful. The situation she had been evaluating all these years was not ending. It was evolving. The story was not closing. It was preparing for a new chapter. Yet what she discovered next was never supposed to happen that day. Because just as she was sitting there, lost in reflection, her phone vibrated. One message. Unexpected. Unplanned. Completely unrelated, or so it appeared. She glanced at the screen. At first, she almost ignored it. Then she read the sender's name. And everything changed. Because this was not someone who usually reached out. Not without a reason. Not without careful consideration. Her heart began beating a little faster. Not from fear. From intuition. The strange feeling that life was connecting pieces faster than anyone anticipated. She opened the message. The words were short. Simple. Yet they carried more weight than entire conversations. As she read them, her eyes widened. The timing was astonishing. Almost impossible. The message referenced something she had been thinking about only moments earlier. The very subject she had just been reflecting upon. And suddenly, the distance between separate events began disappearing. The phone call. The old memory. The forgotten keepsake. This new message. They were no longer isolated moments. They were connected. Part of the same unfolding picture. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because the message contained an invitation. Not a formal invitation. Not a dramatic one. Just a simple request. Yet she immediately understood its significance. Accepting it could place her directly in the middle of a conversation that had been avoided for years. A conversation involving people who had remained silent for far too long. People whose lives were more connected than they realized. For several minutes, she stared at the screen. Thinking. Praying. Reflecting. Then, with remarkable calm, she made her decision. She typed her response. Read it twice. And pressed send. The moment the message left her phone, she felt something shift. Not outside. Inside. A certainty. A peace. A feeling that the waiting season was beginning to loosen its grip. But what she could not possibly know was that someone else would receive news of her decision before sunset. And their reaction would reveal a hidden truth that had remained protected for years. A truth so unexpected that when it finally surfaced, it would force everyone involved to reconsider what they believed was impossible.